Hey guys, we're heading back way back to a world of golden light reed-woven homes and gentle honking in the distance. You're waking up just as the horizon begins to smear itself with that soft pink and sand glow only the Nile can provide. The air smells faintly of date cakes, wet clay, and something else. Something floral. Ah, yes. Goose. Perfume goose. You're living in a small house made of mud brick, the kind where the walls breathe with the night air, and the roof is just high enough to not hit your head unless you're unusually enthusiastic about mornings. Outside, the Nile murmurs in the distance like it's telling secrets you're not supposed to hear yet. But closer still, right outside your door is a feathered ruckus. You groan. You stretch. You are, for better or worse, a goosekeeper now. And no, you probably wouldn't survive this. Between the heat, the fleas, the goose-related injuries they bite, and the constant scent of juniper oil being dabbed on poultry, it's safe to say your modern constitution would crumble faster than a stale barley cake. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're listening from somewhere interesting, and let's be honest, you probably are, leave your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The geese are already awake, which you can tell by the volume. There's a hierarchy to the honking older males with their pompous, raspy blasts, younger birds chirping indignantly over breakfast. One particularly entitled goose who has taken to knocking over his water dish because you didn't serve him first. You shuffle outside and try not to trip over the feed baskets. The reeds crunch underfoot and your breath steams a little. It's early enough for coolness, but not for long. You pass your neighbor who gives you the same look she always does. Equal parts pity and amusement. Her family raises cats, clean, aloof, quiet cats. You, however, have chosen chaos in feathered form. The geese are waddling about in organized disarray. Most are white with amber eyes and curved, dangerous beaks. You spot the prized one, Neferset, a female with a ribbon around her neck and the personality of a minor goddess. She's been perfumed recently. You can smell the sweet blend of myrrh and lotus oil that clings to her down. And no, you didn't hallucinate that. Ancient Egyptians really did perfume their pet geese, sometimes to honor the gods, sometimes to impress guests, sometimes because they could. These weren't just barnyard animals, they were luxuries, sometimes even sacred ones. Today you've got your work cut out for you. There's a noble coming by to inspect the flock, probably wants a goose or two for his garden menagerie, which, rumor has it, includes baboons that wear jewelry. You'll need to make sure the birds are clean, their ribbons untangled, and their scents refreshed. You consider briefly whether anyone in history has ever had to deal with more high-maintenance birds. Probably not. The sun is higher now and the geese are basking in the light like royalty. You toss handfuls of emergrain into the yard, then make your way to the enclosure with the shallow pools. It's time for the morning bath. And you know what that means, slipping on wet stones, splashing your tunic, and being judged by a goose with eyeliner? Okay, not actual eyeliner, but the ancient Egyptians did sometimes paint their sacred birds for ceremonies. Eyeliner on people. Sure, eyeliner on birds. That's when you know a civilization has reached its decorative peak. You hum to yourself as you scrub out a basin. The geese crowd around, some curious, some just angry that you're not feeding them again. One nibbles your heel. You sigh. There's no reasoning with geese. Historians still argue whether these birds were genuinely revered for their spiritual symbolism or just made excellent status pets. Probably both. The Egyptians weren't exactly subtle when it came to symbolism, and birds, especially those that could be tied to the Nile or sun gods, had an easy in with the clergy and elite. Once the basins are clean, you mix a small batch of scented oil. You've got ingredients from the market, a little frankincense, some lotus extract, a splash of cinnamon bark. You can't afford the really rare stuff like imported saffron or cedar resin, but you do your best. You dab the oil behind the wings and around the necks of the chosen geese, those most likely to be admired or offered. The result, a feathery flock that smells like a high-end spa, where the clients occasionally try to peck the masseuse. You finish just as the noble's assistant arrives. He's sweating already and he doesn't hide his dislike for birds. You do your best to appear professional while Neferset honks loudly behind you, demanding more grain. You ignore her. The assistant looks over the flock, sniffs the air with confusion, and selects two birds. You nod, scribble a note for your records, and gently herd the chosen ones into a reed crate lined with soft cloth. Off they go to a garden far nicer than your entire village. You clean up. The geese settle. The sun blazes down with a kind of heavy serenity. Your hands smell like perfumed feathers in mild despair. You sit in the shade watching the Nile shimmer in the distance. Somewhere out there beyond the reeds and the temples and the gossiping cats, someone else is probably having a very different day. But you've perfumed a goose. You've lived a little history, and really isn't that enough? You don't so much rise from your shady spot as unfold from it, joint stiff from crouching, and hands still bearing the faint sheen of goose oil. The Nile hums its sleepy tune in the background, and overhead, a few ibises glide in lazy arcs, probably judging your flock from above like celestial poultry critics. Back at your pen, the geese have settled into their post-bath lull. Some are snoozing under the awning, others peck half-heartedly at imaginary crumbs. Neverset, of course, has commandeered the cleanest corner wings, half spread like a diva mid-monologue. You know better than to let your guard down too soon. This lull is temporary. Because here's the thing, these geese aren't just animals. They're status. They're signal flares of soft power. If your family can afford perfume geese or even to work with them, it says something. It says you're part of the temple economy or noble retinue, that you have enough standing to deal in honking luxury. It's easy to forget now, but in ancient Egypt, animals weren't categorized into clean pet or livestock boxes like we tend to do today. They existed in this fuzzy, overlapping spectrum of sacredness, symbolism, utility, and, well, fluff. And geese strutted right down the middle of it all. You remember your uncle once explaining this as you walked past a temple courtyard. The goose, he said, holding a date between his teeth like a philosopher with a pipe, is a creature of contradiction. Loud but sacred, ridiculous but revered. You'd rolled your eyes at the time, but he wasn't wrong. In wealthier households, geese were groomed and trained, their every movement carefully curated. Some noble children were even gifted geese as companions, like feathered bitey lapdogs. They were taught to come when called, sometimes to perch for portraits, and to submit at least briefly to being dressed in decorative collars. And yes, you've heard the stories about one prince's goose who apparently could dance to harp music. Whether that's truth or propaganda, you'll never know. But let's just say the mental image has staying power. There are even reliefs in tombs like those at Maidum where rows of geese are painted with individual feather patterns, unique postures, subtle personality hints. These aren't just background animals. They're the stars of the show. Of course, not all geese got the deluxe treatment. Some were temple offerings raised in bulk for sacrifice or festivals. Some were farmyard sentinels, their honks useful as alarms. And some were dinner. But among the elite, especially during the New Kingdom, owning or gifting a goose, particularly one that smelled nice and didn't attack the priest, was a subtle flex. You glance at your own flock and wonder how many of them know their symbols of high taste and ritual significance. Probably none, but they carry themselves like it. Even your reed supplier, an old man with exactly 2 teeth and infinite opinions, claims to remember a time when geese were paraded down festival routes in flower garlands. Saw it myself, he says every time. Little sandals on their feet, pink ones, proper gold clasps. Historians still argue whether geese ever actually wore ceremonial sandals or if that was just a stylized way to show off wealth in murals. But the idea persists. You return to the pens just in time to catch 2 juvenile geese fighting over a beetle. There's a brief, undignified skirmish that ends with one honking in abject betrayal and the other standing victorious, beetle half-crushed and unappealing. You sigh. You separate them gently and drop a small handful of fresh grain nearby. Crisis averted. As you crouch beside the trough adjusting a crooked feeding dish, you hear distant laughter. Kids are racing through the village paths, their feet kicking up little clouds of dust. One of them shouts something about a goose chase, and you smile. It's a common game here, run through someone else's geese and hope you don't get bitten. Simple joys. Later, just before midday, you're visited by a priest in training from the temple up the slope. He's maybe 13, serious-eyed, and already balding in a way that feels unfair. He's here to check on the incense birds, a fancy way of saying the geese destined for temple use. You nod, lead him to the enclosure, and try not to laugh when one of the birds pecks at his sandal strings. He flinches. You pretend not to notice. The boy whispers a short prayer over the selected geese and marks them with a bit of ochre behind their wings. You've seen it done dozens of times, but the ritual still gives you chills, the way even this absurd honky ritual connects to something bigger, older, more sacred than you can really wrap your head around. The marked geese will be escorted to the temple courtyard tomorrow morning, where they'll be bathed again, scented again, and presented with an offering of blue lotus petals. If the gods are feeling generous, perhaps these geese will make it into myth. Or dinner. You see, not every sacred goose ends its life in incense and applause. Some are simply blessed and released. Others become symbolic meals consumed not as mundane food, but as part of a religious cycle that links body and divinity. You try not to think about it too hard. Because right now Neferset is sitting in your lap. She waddled over when she saw the ochre marking, and though she's not on the list, she's clearly decided that today she is special. Her weight is familiar, her down is still faintly floral, and her eyes oddly feel like they know something you don't. Maybe she does. Maybe as the priest in training walks away brushing feathers from his robe and mumbling about his notes, you begin to understand the deeper pull of these birds. Not just noise and chaos, but history in feathered form. Living metaphors for birth protection, luxury, and divinity. And also the occasional peck to the shin. You pat Neferset's neck. She honks softly. The sun's high now. Time for shade and grain and maybe a nap. You awake to the subtle chorus of the village stirring low murmur of voices, the faint clatter of pottery, and somewhere nearby the unmistakable honk of your geese demanding breakfast. It's a gentle rousing, nothing like the blaring alarms you'd never survive. The morning sun filters through the reed mat walls, casting lazy stripes across your humble dwelling. You stretch, feeling the cool Nile breeze sneak in, carrying with it the faint scent of papyrus and something floral, likely the remnant perfume still clinging to your pet geese. As you prepare to step outside, you catch sight of Neferset perched proudly atop her little wooden stand, her feathers fluffed like a feathered monarch surveying her domain. Today, she's more than a pet. She's a living emblem of ancient Egyptian ritual and status. Perfumed pet geese were the real deal symbols of grace and a hint of eccentric luxury in a world where every scent, sound, and ritual mattered. You head to the water basin to wash your hands, the cool water grounding you, as you think about the origins of this curious practice. Perfuming animals isn't unique to Egypt, but the Egyptians perfected it with exquisite oils, frankincense, and myrrh. The geese weren't just spritzed for show. The perfumes helped mask the natural musk of the birds, making them more pleasant companions and enhancing their sacred aura. This practice ties into a broader ancient Egyptian obsession with scent. You remember hearing that some pharaohs took perfumes so seriously they would store them in intricately carved alabaster jars, ensuring the fragrances lasted through eternity. It's fascinating these perfumes were more than adornment. They were a bridge between the mortal and divine, a fragrant language speaking to gods and humans alike. Historians still argue whether the use of perfume on animals was primarily practical ceremonial or a bit of both. Some suggest it was a hygienic necessity given Egypt's hot climate, while others believe it was about status, signaling a way for the wealthy to flaunt their refinement in subtle but unmistakable ways. You watch as one of your geese, likely sensing your gaze, preens, deliberately spreading its wings to catch the light. There's something almost theatrical about it, as if the bird knows it's playing a part in a grand performance, a ritual dance choreographed by centuries of custom. You step outside into the village's soft hustle, noticing children weaving between market stalls, women balancing clay pots on their heads, and the steady hum of artisans at work. The geese follow along their honks, punctuating the calm like sleepy punctuation marks. Later, you visit the local perfumer's workshop, a fragrant cave of wonders where oils and resins bubble in bronze vessels. The perfumer explains how specific scents were blended to create the perfect pet perfume, light, sweet, and not overpowering. The recipe is part art, part alchemy passed down through generations. It's said that certain combinations could even calm the birds, making them more docile and easier to handle, a useful trait when your goose has a habit of biting curious fingers. You're reminded of the strange, almost obsessive care Egyptians lavished on animals, from cats wearing jewelry to sacred bulls treated like royalty. This perfumed goose business fits right into that tradition, an odd blend of practicality, devotion, and a touch of whimsy. The day wears on, filled with small moments, rinsing the geese in the Nile's gentle current, carefully applying scented oils and watching the flicker of sunlight on their shimmering feathers. You feel a quiet connection to the past, to rituals that blend the mundane and the magical. And as twilight approaches, you think about how this simple practice perfuming pet geese encapsulates so much of what makes ancient Egypt endlessly fascinating, the delicate balance of daily life belief and the occasional splash of unexpected elegance. The evening settles like a linen shroud over the village, soft and cool, and you find yourself reclining on a woven mat just outside your home. The geese are nestled nearby feathers, slightly ruffled from a long day of parading through perfume rituals and village strolls. You run your fingers absent-mindedly through a dish of sweet-smelling lotus petals, thinking about the curious roles animals play, not just as companions, but as subtle mirrors of society itself. In ancient Egypt, status wasn't always shouted, it was often whispered through the scent of your goose. You watch as a neighbor passes by his own goose, waddling dutifully at his side, its white feathers dabbed with a gentle lavender oil. It honks politely at yours as if recognizing them from a long lineage of pampered poultry. It's not just showmanship. Perfumed geese could be used as wedding gifts, tokens of favor, or even offerings to the gods. The more fragrant the bird, the more esteem it carried. You begin to appreciate that these weren't just pets. They were quiet indicators of your place in the cosmic pecking order, pun gently intended. The idea of perfumed geese showing up in temples might sound like something invented by a bored scribe, but it has a strangely grounded logic. Animals were sacred in Egypt, not metaphorically, but literally. The gods didn't merely like cats and crocodiles, they were cats and crocodiles. And geese, those were sacred too. Geb, the god of the earth, was sometimes depicted as a goose, and his honk was said to be the primordial sound of creation. So really, if you were slathering your feathered friend in myrrh and guiding it down a temple aisle, you weren't being eccentric. You were participating in cosmic maintenance. Historians still debate whether these perfume rituals had strict religious guidelines or were more of a social trend that spiraled into spiritual territory. Some argue that temple geese had specific priests responsible for their grooming, including fragrance care. Others think it was more ad hoc, a goose here, a whiff of frankincense there, depending on the occasion. Regardless, you can't help imagining the divine chaos of trying to line up a gaggle of perfumed geese for a ritual. Maybe that's why priests walked with such measured dignity. They were constantly one honk away from mayhem. Back in your own little courtyard, you reach for a small jar of unguent, a thick fragrant oil made from moringa, and a few drops of cinnamon bark. The scent is comforting, warm, and earthy. As you smooth it over the back of your favorite goose, who closes her eyes in bliss, clearly enjoying the spa treatment, you realize this moment contains more ritual than you'd thought. It's a reminder that ancient Egyptian life wasn't all grand tombs and pharaoh decrees. It was also about small, deliberate acts. The brushing of feathers, the blending of oils, the care poured into a creature not for profit or utility, but because it was loved, revered, or at the very least pleasing to the nose. As the stars blink into view overhead, you find yourself wondering how a society that built pyramids also found time to perfume poultry. But maybe that's the secret. They didn't see those things as separate. The divine was always mingling with the daily grind, like perfume smoke curling through a busy street, present, fragrant, and quietly shaping the world. Somewhere a flute begins to play a low, slow tune. It's likely just a shepherd passing time on the riverbank, but in the moment it sounds like the score to a much older story, one filled with feathered deities, scented rituals, and a world where even a goose might be sacred. Your pet honks again softly this time and leans against your leg. You smile, reaching down to smooth her feathers once more and catch the faint aroma of rosewater. It's odd, you think, how something so simple as scent, a bird, a breeze, can make you feel both grounded and eternal. The flute's last notes dissolve into the night air as the village drifts into hush. A few oil lamps still flicker here and there, small golden halos warding off the dark. You rise slowly, brushing lotus petals from your robe, and step inside. Your home smells faintly of cedar wood and baked grain, a warm contrast to the floral tang still clinging to the geese just outside your door. Tonight you can't help but dwell on the deeper implications of animal companionship in Egyptian society. Beyond affection or symbolism, there were surprisingly practical dimensions too. Geese weren't merely perfumed ornaments, they played roles in economic life, spiritual rituals, and even entertainment. You lie down mat cool beneath your back and imagine yourself as one of the bird keepers who worked in the estates of the elite. Inscriptions from tombs and villas mention these individuals, keepers of sacred or noble geese, tasked not only with feeding and grooming, but with ensuring the birds remain calm, clean, and of course, pleasantly scented. Picture yourself rising at dawn, stirring pots of balm, and mixing powdered resin into water, creating a rudimentary sort of aromatherapy bath for your birds. You lift one goose gently into the basin, its webbed feet paddling lazily as you hum an old hymn. Some scholars suggest that wealthy households took special pride in their bird's appearance and smell. A guest at a banquet might not remember the lentils, but they'd remember the house with geese that smelled like almond blossoms. The idea sounds silly until you remember that this was a culture where eyeliner had spiritual properties and where even beer was offered to the gods. Historians still debate the extent to which perfumed geese were common across classes. Was this a widespread practice or something mostly confined to the elite circles in cities like Memphis and Thebes? While rural families likely didn't spend their last dabbins on floral oil for their feathered pets, it's not unreasonable to imagine simpler versions, perhaps rubbing herbs like mint or chamomile into a goose's feathers before a festival. You close your eyes and recall a fragment from a wall painting you saw in a noble's tomb, a line of geese walking calmly beside a pool, each bird attended by a small figure holding what looks like a flask. Were those attendants perfuming the geese before a ritual, or were they simply feeding them treats? The details blur as so much does with time, but the care is clear, each bird rendered with precise lines, their feathers outlined lovingly in ochre and white. In some ways, you realize these animals occupied a middle ground between pets and religious actors. They were deeply embedded in the texture of Egyptian life, not just as creatures to be eaten or sacrificed, but as intermediaries. Geese were known to honk loudly when strangers approached. Their voices made them guardians as well as companions. And perhaps their perfume wasn't just for beauty or olfactory delight, but as a kind of protection, a blessing wrapped in scent. Your own goose, sensing your drifting thoughts, waddles into the house with all the subtlety of a parade float. She settles next to you, gives a gentle huff, and lays her head down. Her breath smells faintly of soaked barley. You smile, drifting somewhere between amusement and wonder. How did the ancient Egyptians find time to care so deeply for their animals amidst plagues, invasions, and ambitious pyramid blueprints? Maybe it wasn't about time at all. Maybe it was about priority, this shared understanding that every small, fragrant, honking detail played a part in holding the world together. And maybe that's why all these centuries later, we're still trying to piece those details back together. Not just to admire them, but to feel a little closer to the hands that once brushed oil onto feathers, believing it mattered. Outside, the Nile flows steadily, dark and timeless. Your goose sighs. You turn on your side and pull the linen sheet closer, the scent of sandalwood lulling you deeper. The scent of sandalwood still lingers in the air as morning seeps into the edges of your dreams. The light creeps in softly golden, drowsy warm as fresh bread. Your goose snoozes beside you, feathers slightly ruffled from sleep, a single downy plume caught in a quiet breeze drifting through the window. You stretch slowly and let your mind drift, not quite ready to rise. Outside, life is already in motion. Market calls, carts creaking on sand-packed roads, the distant murmur of temple chants floating across the river. You can picture the priestesses walking in single file, each carrying a bundle of myrrh, frankincense, or honey cakes wrapped in lotus leaves, and yes, maybe even a goose or two trailing behind. But while geese strutted through rituals and perfumed their way into paintings, they also left their mark in more everyday corners of Egyptian life. As you finally sit up and reach for a cup of watered beer, you're reminded that the line between sacred and mundane wasn't nearly as sharp back then. A goose could be an offering one day and lunch the next. That's where it gets interesting because while we often romanticize the ancient world, perfumed geese, golden headdresses, eternal youth, it was also deeply practical. Egyptians kept geese for eggs, meat, and even down feathers, which were used to stuff cushions and bedding. Some wealthier homes had small pillow rooms filled with linen and down-stuffed bolsters, cozy enough to make even your modern mattress jealous. You lean against the wall, imagining one of these plush spaces gently illuminated by oil lamps and scented with Kifi incense. A servant enters with a tray of roasted goose, and you can't help but feel a twinge of sympathy for the bird, perhaps once perfumed, now garnished. Historians still argue whether the same geese that were perfumed and pampered could later end up as dinner. Some suggest there were entirely separate flocks: temple geese, pet geese, market geese, each bred and raised for distinct roles. Others believe that much like an aging courtier, a goose might transition from temple beauty to honored entree over time. It's a bit grim, but also entirely human. You pause, letting your eyes roam the simple patterns painted on your wall: looping lotus blossoms, pale blue waves of the Nile, a faint outline of a goose mid-honk. Was the artist amused when he painted it? Maybe he had a favorite bird of his own. You decide to take your goose for a walk, partly to stretch your legs, and partly to let her enjoy the morning bustle. She waddles behind you dutifully, like a small feathery diplomat. Children giggle and point, and one woman smiles, calling out a greeting. She smells like lemon balm today. You nod proudly. She does. As you stroll, you pass a scribe hunched under a canopy of woven reeds. He's carefully copying a papyrus scroll, muttering about ink consistency and dodging a curious cat. The scroll beside him catches your eye. It's a farmer's account book listing eggs, grain, and yes, geese. Not by number, but by name. Turns out naming geese wasn't unusual. Egyptians often named their animals and sometimes even commemorated them in tomb inscriptions. One tomb records a goose named Nefru, meaning beauty. Another mentions Seneb, which translates to healthy. Your goose, for the record, is affectionately called Teti, after a rather fussy Old Kingdom pharaoh. She lives up to it. You stop to buy a small pouch of crushed marjoram and sage from an herb seller. He raises an eyebrow as you sprinkle a little over Teddy's wings. You know, he says, half amused, some say geese carried messages for the gods. You nod slowly. That checks out. And why wouldn't they? Between their honking voices, their stubborn dignity, and their ability to waddle directly into sacred spaces without shame, they were practically divine mail carriers. You continue your walk, the sunlight soft and sleepy on your skin, Teddy beside you, marjoram scented and majestic. Maybe it's true, maybe these creatures did carry messages for the gods. Or maybe, just maybe, they carried messages to us, gentle reminders to slow down, breathe deeply, and take a moment to appreciate life's quieter absurdities. You sit in the shade of a tamarisk tree, your goose nestled comfortably at your side, lazily preening a wing. The Nile glistens nearby, sending up little flickers of sunlit ripple, like the surface itself is laughing at some private joke. The city hums in the background, but out here it feels distant, blurred, softened by warm breeze and the sleepy scent of dust and herbs. You take this moment of stillness to think more deeply about the animals that shared space with humans in ancient Egypt, not just physically, but spiritually and symbolically. Geese, as it turns out, were hardly background noise. They were tangled up in the very fabric of Egyptian mythology. Consider Geb, the god of the earth, often depicted with a goose perched atop his head. Yes, like a feathery crown, he was said to sometimes take the form of a goose himself, which, when you think about it, gives a whole new meaning to goosing the ground. This earned geese a permanent seat in the sacred animal pantheon. They were symbols of creation and life tied to stories about the world's beginning. Some myths claim that the cosmic egg, yes, the actual first egg, was laid by the great cackler, a divine goose whose honk echoed across the primordial waters and sparked the unfolding of existence. Historians still argue whether this myth emerged from natural observation, geese being excellent egg layers and particularly noisy about it, or whether the symbolism of the egg as life's starting point was simply too perfect to ignore. Either way, once you picture a god honking the universe into being, it's hard to go back. You glance over at Tati, who is attempting to eat a beetle with great theatrical flailing. Divine indeed. But even beyond, Geb, geese appeared in spells, hymns, and funerary texts. The Book of the Dead, for instance, includes prayers referencing the great white goose of Ra, and in some burial rituals, the soul was imagined to transform into a bird, a goose among them, to fly freely in the afterlife. This idea that a soul might honk its way across eternity is oddly comforting. You return home by midday, stepping into the coolness of your dwelling. Teddy settles into her familiar clay bowl near the doorway, and you offer her a few soaked dates, which she accepts with her usual suspicious dignity. As you prepare a light lunch, you think about how the Egyptians blurred the lines between animal and divine, between household and temple. Owning a goose wasn't just owning a bird, it was brushing up against myth, living alongside a creature who had once created the world with a single, very serious honk. In your kitchen, the flatbread is warm from the fire, and a pot of lentil stew bubbles contentedly. You can almost hear the echo of those ancient prayers floating in from a nearby temple, blending with the aroma of cumin and garlic. That's the beauty of this world, everything overlaps. A goose isn't just a goose, it's a source of food, a character in a myth, a bearer of perfume, a subject of tax record, a noisy security system, and if she's like Teti, a self-declared queen of your home. As you eat, you recall an old tale a priest once told at a festival. It was meant for children, but it stuck with you. In it, a goose tricked a crocodile by pretending to be a priestess of Isis. She flapped her wings in a ceremonial dance, doused herself in rosewater, and convinced the beast to grant her safe passage across the river. It's unclear whether this story was meant to inspire cleverness or simply entertain, but either way, the message was clear: underestimate a goose at your peril. Teddy, for her part, seems completely uninterested in river crossings or cosmic eggs. She's napping again, her beak tucked beneath her wing feathers, still fragrant with marjoram and the faintest trace of lavender oil. You stretch your legs, finish the last of your bread, and recline. Somewhere far off, you hear another goose honk, a long, drawn-out declaration of existence. You smile and drift again into a half-doze, letting the warmth of the afternoon and the murmur of stories guide you into quiet. Afternoon in the village edges toward golden. The sun dips slightly, casting longer shadows, and the air takes on a drowsy weight that presses gently on your eyelids. Somewhere, a lyre plucks a sleepy tune. Teddy waddles over to investigate a puddle left by someone washing jars, pecking at the shimmer as if it might bite back. The scent of warm earth, crushed mint, and yes, goose lingers in the air. You're headed now toward the estate of a local noblewoman, one of the elite class whose affections toward animals are as lavish as they are oddly specific. Her gardens are renowned across the Nome, and more interestingly, her collection of perfumed pets. Yes, geese among them has become the stuff of polite gossip. And you're not just here to peek. Today you're assisting in the mild chaos of bath time. You're handed a bowl of scented water, an infusion of lotus honey, and something tangy like tamarind, and guided to the edge of a sun-dappled courtyard where a dozen geese are lounging like they pay rent. They honk softly, not in alarm, but in that half-muttered grumble they make when discussing something very boring. Probably taxes. Here you help with the process, a gentle washing, feather by feather, followed by a light application of scented oil, brushed along the neck and chest. You work alongside a servant named Khufu, who has been doing this for so long he can identify individual birds by their honk pitch alone. These two, he says, nodding at a matching pair with black-tipped beaks, belong to Lady Nebet's private shrine. They only bathe in myrrh, spoiled little gods. It's not just eccentricity. High-status women in ancient Egypt often kept exotic or pampered animals, cats, ibises, monkeys, and yes, geese, not only as companions, but as status symbols. Perfuming them was part ritual, part hygiene, and part pure indulgence. Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted in religious symbolism, aesthetic preference, or just sheer elite boredom, perhaps a bit of all three. But one thing is clear: these birds were deeply embedded in the rhythms of elite life. You spot one particularly dramatic goose with a bright red ribbon around her neck. Khufu tells you she once disrupted a festival by waddling up the temple steps and honking loudly through the high priest's entire recitation. Lady Nebet found it so amusing she awarded the goose a title Mistress of Interruptions, and the ribbon has been ceremonially reapplied ever since. You ask if the ribbon ever gets washed. Khufu just sighs. As you dry one goose gently with a linen cloth, you realize how much care goes into this absurd little tradition. Every bird is dried, perfumed again, and allowed to strut about the courtyard, looking smug and slightly dazed as if stepping out of a particularly refreshing spa. You think of your own humble Teddy, who would probably refuse this treatment outright, then demand to eat the scented oil. She has very particular tastes and a healthy distrust of fancy towels. By late afternoon, the perfumed geese are parading back toward their designated enclosures, feathers gleaming and attitudes inflated. The lady of the estate appears briefly to admire them from a shaded veranda. She claps once lightly, and the geese respond with what you can only describe as an orchestrated chorus of indifference. Back in the village, the smell of roasting garlic and barley porridge wafts from open windows. You pass a boy leading a goose on a tether of braided palm fiber. The goose is clearly in charge, dragging the boy sideways in pursuit of something shiny. You pause at a stall selling little stone amulets, anks, scarabs, and curiously a tiny goose with exaggerated tail feathers. The vendor tells you it's a charm for joy and long life. You buy it not because you're superstitious, but because, well, maybe you are just a little. That night as you settle down to sleep, Teddy climbs into your lap and lets out a contented puff of air like a teapot exhaling. You think again of those pampered geese of red ribbons and sacred eggs and gods honking the world into motion. And you wonder just briefly what your own title might be were you a goose in Lady Nebbit's courtyard. Probably something like official nap coordinator. You smile into the quiet and let the dust cradle you. Morning sneaks back in with a pale haze over the Nile, and the first honks of the day drift lazily across the water like very opinionated fog. Teddy is already awake, stomping around in search of crumbs and refusing to acknowledge that you, her appointed servant, may require more than 5 hours of sleep. Today's plan takes you beyond the town limits toward a more sacred purpose. You've been invited, well conscripted really, to assist a priest in charge of a small temple dedicated to Thoth. And where Thoth is revered, you can be certain geese won't be far behind. You walk along a dusty path lined with flowering papyrus and the occasional lizard doing push-ups on warm stones. The temple itself is modest, built of sun-bleached limestone and half-shaded by date palms, but its role in the spiritual life of the region is anything but minor. Inside the outer courtyard, things are surprisingly lively. A scribe is arguing with a potter over the proper depiction of a goose in the latest offering bowl. The beak must curve slightly, or it's just a duck, while two young acolytes wrestle with a runaway gander, who has stolen a tassel from a priest's robe and refuses to give it back. You try not to laugh. You fail. In Egyptian mythology, geese weren't just adorable troublemakers. They were at various points cosmic creators. Some versions of the Heliopolitan creation myth speak of the great honker, well, technically the great cackler, a goose who laid the primordial egg from which the sun god Ra emerged. It's not every day you hear the universe began with a honk, but here we are. Historians still argue whether this was a direct reflection of goose behavior, loud, territorial, alarmingly fertile, or if the animal was selected more for its symbolic duality, wild and domestic, chaotic and sacred, edible and eternal. Regardless, in temple art, geese appear often, sometimes waddling behind deities, sometimes resting under golden altars, always with the expression of something that could either bless you or bite your ankle. Your task today is simple but strange. Accompany the senior priest Menenhet as he prepares a ceremonial goose offering, not a sacrifice, but a symbolic presentation meant to honor Thoth. The bird is never harmed. Instead, it is bathed, anointed, and coaxed into releasing one perfect feather to be bound into a quill for ritual inscriptions. You meet the designated goose, a white-feathered beauty named Senet, with eyes sharp as obsidian and a neck that curves like a question mark. She is surprisingly cooperative, perhaps sensing the occasion. Or perhaps she simply likes the smell of Menenhet's incense. Either way, the feather is collected with almost comical reverence, wrapped in blue linen and placed in a tiny gold box shaped like a goose egg. Menenhet turns to you and says, "This feather will help write the names of the dead so they don't get lost." You nod quietly on. Later, as you help clean out a goose pen behind the sanctuary, less glamorous, certainly, you come across a mural. It's faded but clearly shows a line of geese marching in stately formation beneath a shining sun disk. Some carry scrolls. Others appear to be wearing, is that a sort of cap? You point, curious. Menenhet squints. Some say Thoth sent messages to Earth through birds. Sacred geese might carry dreams back to the gods, or complaints. He smiles faintly. Geese are very good at complaints. That night on your way home, the stars shimmer like fish scales in the sky. Teddy walks beside you, occasionally stopping to nibble a reed or glare at invisible adversaries. You think about the feather, how something so light could be asked to carry the names of the dead. You think about how sacred that seems, and also how goose-like it is to demand a little flair when it comes to matters of life, death, and cosmic communication. Back at your modest hut, you tuck a blanket over your legs, and Teddy hops up beside you with a grunt. She stretches her neck across your arm, impossibly warm and soft, and sighs as if she's just finished her taxes. You drift off to sleep, wondering what dreams she might carry away tonight, and whether they'll get where they're going. The sun creeps through your thatched roof with the insistence of a toddler poking you in the forehead. Teddy, for once, is still asleep, her neck twisted into a pose only geese and yoga instructors can manage. You take the chance to slip away and head for the market. Today's errand perfume. Not for yourself, though. The heat is starting to make a strong case. No, you're fetching scented oils, specifically a blend of myrrh lotus and something vaguely musky for an elderly noblewoman who has requested that her flock of pet geese be suitably fragranced. You don't question it, you just bring the coins. At the perfumer's stall, waves of scent roll over you in syrupy layers. Frankincense, cinnamon, honey, something minty that tickles your nose and makes your left eye water. Behind a low clay counter, the perfumer greets you with a smile full of wisdom and possibly mischief. She's been doing this since before you were born and claims to have once scented the geese of a pharaoh's second wife. They smelled like lavender and vengeance, she tells you, not elaborating. She hands over 3 tiny jars carefully stoppered. Rub under their wings, she instructs, not the beak. You'll regret the beak. You don't ask why. Carrying the little perfumes in a basket, you make your way to the estate where the noblewoman, Lady Nebet, lives. Her home is an airy, mosaic-lined villa surrounded by date palms, vines, and unsurprisingly, a honking, waddling army of geese. You are greeted at the gate by a servant who looks as though he's reconsidered every life choice that brought him here. They're temperamental today, he warns, nodding toward the birds who appear to be staging a dramatic coup near the fish pond. You catch sight of Lady Nebet reclined under a shade pavilion, watching the chaos with the detachment of someone who owns multiple wigs and never personally washes her own feet. Ah, she purrs, you've brought the perfumes. Splendid. They simply will not sleep unless they're scented. Neither will I, the honking. So you begin, one goose at a time. It's a strange process, rubbing fragrant oils beneath the wings of a very indignant bird. Some take to it like spa-goers, closing their eyes and letting out gentle sighs. Others peck at you with suspicious resolve. One, a particularly fluffy individual named Mian, tries to drink the perfume straight from the jar. By the time you finish the last one, you smell like a perfumed pastry, and your arms are dotted with tiny peck marks. Lady Nebet waves her bejeweled fingers in appreciation. They're so calm now. You'd never believe it, but they used to shriek until dawn. You would believe it, actually. Historians still debate whether perfuming geese was widespread or more of an eccentric elite pastime. There are scattered references in temple records to anointing oils for sacred animals, and one battered ostracon depicts a priest applying what looks like coal to the face of a distinctly smug goose. Some argue this was symbolic, preparing the bird for divine representation. Others think ancient pet culture was just more elaborate than we give it credit for. The connection between scent and ritual in Egypt runs deep. The act of perfuming was seen not just as cosmetic, but as spiritual hygiene. Gods were said to dwell in pleasant smells. Perhaps by making a goose smell like lotus, you made it feel more like a creature worthy of paradise. You rest on a stone bench near the courtyard after your work is done. The perfumed geese wander the gardens like tiny incense burners, leaving trails of floral serenity and the occasional feather behind them. One curls up beside your foot, sighs dramatically, and nestles its beak under your leg. You swear it smells faintly of sandalwood and resignation. Back home that night, Teddy sniffs your sleeves and glares at you, clearly detecting betrayal. You explain yourself, though she pretends not to care. Eventually, she climbs into your lap and makes a sound that might be forgiveness or a warning. You fall asleep wondering what it says about a civilization that went to such lengths for its animals, and whether your dreams tonight will smell faintly of myrrh. It's just after dawn when you find yourself summoned by way of an anxious teenage runner to the House of Life, one of the local temple complexes that functions not only as a religious site, but also as a center for education, healing, and apparently advanced goose care. You're greeted by a priest with the tired expression of someone who's read every scroll in the archive and is now contemplating a quiet career in basket weaving. We've got a problem, he says. The geese in the sacred aviary are molting, and the high priest insists it's a spiritual imbalance. You blink slowly. The temple's aviary is not small, nor quiet. It is, in fact, an enclosed garden filled with greenery, water features, carved perches, and roughly 24 cranky half-bald geese shedding feathers like confetti at a divine festival. The molting season, it turns out, is peak drama. You kneel beside a particularly scruffy bird named Sahur, who's missing so many feathers he resembles a mildly annoyed cactus. He honks once accusingly, then waddles off in a huff. See, the priest says, no spiritual harmony. In ancient Egypt, birds held sacred status, and not just the fancy falcons and ibises. Geese, too, were symbols of fertility, protection, and resurrection. They were associated with Geb, the earth god, who was sometimes depicted as a man with a goose on his head. And while that's probably not a look you'd personally pull off, it gave geese a divine sort of clout. So when a goose got grumpy or molted too fast, it wasn't just a veterinary issue. It was a theological one. Were the gods displeased? Was there a cosmic imbalance? Or, as you suspect, did Sahur just eat something funny near the compost heap? You help administer a calming ritual, cool water baths, soft chanting, and an offering of barley grains soaked in honey and crushed figs. Most of the geese seem pleased. One tries to steal the priest's sandals. Historians still argue whether these rituals were based on genuine belief or practical caretaking cloaked in mysticism. But either way, it worked. With the geese temporarily soothed, you're led to the House of Life's library where the air smells of old papyrus and the ghost of burned incense. You're shown a scroll that's been puzzling the priests. It's a care manual of sorts, written in an uneven hand, detailing not only how to perfume geese, but also how to interpret their dreams. Yes, dreams. According to the scroll, a goose dreaming of flying upside down meant illness in the household. Dreaming of a river with no water foretold the arrival of in-laws. Some of the symbols feel more like personal grievances than spiritual prophecy. Dreamed of the baker's hat again, one line reads, must avoid him. You leave the temple unsure whether the geese are divine messengers or simply very feathery sleepwalkers. Still, the idea of animals dreaming of them, participating in the same strange wandering mental cinema you do at night is oddly comforting. Outside, you catch sight of a pair of children trying to teach a goose to dance. It's not going well, but the goose seems game. Perfumed and slightly less patchy than before, it twirls with a kind of chaotic grace, wings flapping, head bobbing. The children cheer. The priest sighs. Walking home, you reflect on the strange intersection of reverence and ridiculousness in Egyptian culture. Here, even a molting goose could be seen as a sacred sign, but also it might just be itchy. Back in your courtyard, Teddy is luxuriating in a patch of sunlight, feathers fluffed just so. You sit beside her and tell her about Sahur, about the barley and fig offerings, and about the dreams. She listens, preens, and then headbutts your arm with the force of a miniature chariot. You take that as approval. That night, you dream of a goose wearing a golden headdress, lecturing you about the importance of seasonal molting and deep-scented oils. When you wake, there's a feather on your pillow and the faintest scent of honey lingering in the air. A few days later, you're invited or, well, gently volunteered to assist with the annual scenting of the sacred courtyard, a ceremonial event hosted by a nearby noble family known for their eccentric devotion to all things olfactory. It's not a formal holiday. In fact, most people in the neighborhood are trying very hard to pretend it isn't happening. But for the nobles, it's sacred, and central to the ritual, perfumed geese. Naturally, you arrive just as the sun is melting down the horizon, staining the limestone walls a warm apricot. The courtyard itself is meticulously prepared palm fronds arranged in spirals, bowls of exotic resins bubbling gently over coals, and a shaded alcove filled with none other than 6 freshly bathed geese, each waiting patiently for their turn, in what can only be described as a feathered spa rotation. A steward greets you with the earnest intensity of someone who's taken too many deep inhales of frankincense. You'll be working with Bennu, he says, gesturing to a large white goose with a gold-dyed ribbon tied around her neck. She prefers lotus scent, but occasionally tolerates cinnamon if it's mixed with myrrh. Do not attempt cedar. We had an incident. You nod solemnly and approach Bennu, who eyes you with the kind of judgment only a goose, or perhaps a retired queen, can muster. The steward offers you a small alabaster jar containing a thick golden paste that smells like sun-warmed citrus with a hint of sandalwood. It turns out that perfuming a goose is not as straightforward as it sounds. There's a delicate rhythm, scoop smear, smooth avoid the beak. The goose flutters under your touch but doesn't bolt. Either she's used to this or she's planning revenge. Possibly both. In ancient Egypt, scent wasn't just about smelling nice. It was thought to please the gods, protect the body, and signal one's status. Wealthy individuals often carried scented cones on their heads, which slowly melted during the day, releasing floral and spicy notes. That same philosophy extended to the animals they kept, especially the cherished ones, like cats, ibises, and yes, geese. What's curious is that perfuming wasn't only a luxury. Archaeological digs have uncovered residues of fragrant oils in modest homes and granaries, suggesting even laborers and servants engaged in scent rituals, perhaps as a ward against disease, or simply to soften the odor of hard lives in a hot climate. Bennu, now shimmering faintly in the setting light, fluffs her feathers like a perfumed pillow and lets out a surprisingly dignified honk. A small crowd has gathered: temple, scribes, musicians, the noble matron herself, and all nod approvingly as she waddles down a miniature ceremonial ramp lined with flower petals. Later, you overhear a pair of guests whispering. One insists that the ritual ensures a bountiful harvest. The other counters that it keeps away snakes. A third, slightly tipsy uncle says he once dreamed of a goose and won 3 chickens the next day. Historians still argue whether these scenting ceremonies had any consistent religious meaning or if they were just an olfactory arms race among the elite. You retreat to a shaded bench, watching as the remaining geese parade past in perfumed pairs. A musician plays a soft tune on a reed flute. Somewhere behind you, someone drops a jug, and there's a muffled splash followed by laughter. But mostly it's quiet, the kind of peaceful quiet that settles around fragrant things. Bennu reappears beside you, having apparently decided you passed her test. She rests her head briefly on your knee, a gesture of affection or possibly dominance. You're not sure which. You reach out and stroke her back gently, careful not to disturb the perfumed oil. Your thoughts drift again to the odd blend of utility and pageantry in these rituals. On one hand, scent serves the practical purpose of masking the smells of city life and livestock. On the other, it's theater, ambrosial, absurd, and strangely touching theater. The nobles begin to dance now, slowly and ceremonially. Bennu watches them with mild disdain. You suspect she finds their movements clumsy compared to her own practiced strut. Eventually, the scenting ceremony ends with a quiet offering to the household gods, baskets of dates, papyrus scrolls, soaked in rose water, and yes, a handful of goose feathers wrapped in lavender cloth. You're handed a small jar of the same oil you used on Bennu as a parting gift. For when you want to remember her, the steward says, misty-eyed. You take it, half expecting Bennu to charge at the gesture, but she just blinks slowly, like a queen bestowing her approval. As you walk home, your fingers still carry the scent, subtle, lingering, warm. It mixes with the desert breeze, with the crushed petals underfoot, with a soft memory of laughter and ceremony. At your door, Teddy waddles out to greet you, her feathers ruffled from napping in the shade. You kneel, open the jar, and hold it toward her. She sniffs once, then sneezes with great fanfare, shaking her head, as if to say, "I prefer sandalwood." You laugh, and in the last light of day, with your goose beside you and a courtly scent lingering on the air, you feel oddly honored. Not many people can say they've been personally approved by a perfumed goose. The next morning, the neighborhood is humming with stories about the scented geese. Apparently, one of the guests at the ceremony fainted not from heat but from spiritual overwhelm. Another claims their dreams were filled with prophetic honking, and yet another insists their garden bloomed overnight thanks to the divine power of Bennu's perfumed presence. You, however, have more pressing concerns. It's market day, and Teddy has decided she must accompany you. You try to leave her behind, but she follows anyway, waddling defiantly at your heels as you make your way through the dusty alleys toward the bustling market square. The stalls are a chaos of color and sound, shouts of vendors, hawking pottery and linen, the clang of bronze, and somewhere the pluck of a lyre. And among it all, woven like thread through fabric, is scent. There's something almost sacred about the way aromas layer here. Fresh baked barley bread, sizzling duck fat, fermented fish paste, crushed mint, and that familiar bite of incense curling from a priest's corner stall. You pause at an apothecary's table, its surface crowded with ceramic jars and small reed baskets. The vendor, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an intimidatingly tidy braid, offers you a whiff of something musky and sweet. For calming, stormy pets, she says, glancing at Titi, or stormy humans. You ask about goose scent recipes, and her demeanor softens slightly. Ah, you're one of those. She produces a small jar from beneath the table. Date oil, saffron, and crushed marjoram. The priests use it. They say it helps animals stay quiet during rituals, or at least smell better while they squawk. It's strange to think of scent not just as pleasure, but as a tool one carefully wielded to control, soothe, impress, or distract. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians' obsession with perfumery was more religious than aesthetic. But honestly, watching a priest smear cinnamon oil behind a goat's ears before a lunar festival makes you think it was probably a bit of both. Teddy inspects the jar with regal disinterest. She's far more curious about a nearby basket of dried figs, which she manages to tip over with one well-timed peck. The vendor curses under her breath, then sighs and tosses you 2 figs for free. Your goose has expensive taste. As you move deeper into the market, you begin to notice small things you hadn't paid attention to before: the way people scent the handles of their baskets, the oils brushed into beards and braids, the pouches of herbs tied around waists like perfume grenades. Even the fishmonger has a sprig of thyme pinned to his sash, a futile but charming attempt to mask the smell of his wares. You duck into a narrow alley that leads to the perfumer's quarter, an entire row of artisans whose lives revolve around extracting, mixing, and selling scents. Here the air feels thick with possibilities. One stall specializes in lotus extractions, another in frankincense blends. A third intriguingly claims to sell the perfume of Cleopatra's geese. You don't ask for details. A younger perfumer, barely old enough to grow a mustache, notices Teddy and brightens. "You're the one with the famous goose," he says reverently. "I heard she bit a priest." She hissed you correct gently, but only because he tried to anoint her with cedar oil. He nods solemnly. "Fair, that stuff stings." He invites you into the back of his shop, a quiet, cool space cluttered with amphorae papyrus scrolls and one incredibly lazy cat. He shows you a scroll he's working on, a record of experimental blends. One entry reads juniper plus goose down, surprisingly calming, and another simply says pomegranate fail. He lets you try a blend he's developing for royal pets, fig leaf spikenard, and a dash of musk. It's warm, earthy, and oddly comforting. Teddy closes her eyes when you hold it under her beak and for once doesn't sneeze. "You could make your own," he says, scribbling notes. "Lots of goosekeepers do. One family even tried garlic. Didn't end well." You thank him, and he hands you a small vial as a parting gift. "Tell Bennu I say hi," he adds. You're not sure how news of the perfumed goose parade spread so fast, but honestly, you're not surprised. This is Egypt. If a beetle rolls the wrong way, someone's going to compose a hymn about it. As you head home, you pass a group of children playing Scent the Goose, a very loose interpretation of hide and seek, involving blindfolds and overconfident guesses. One girl claims she can smell which goose is which. She's correct more often than not. You take the long way back, passing a wall painting in progress. The artist is dabbing lotus petal blue onto the feathers of a stylized goose. He sees you and waves. Inspired by yesterday's ceremony, he says, "There's talk of painting Bennu on a temple wall next week." You smile. Fame, it seems, has waddled into your life and shows no signs of leaving. At home, you try your hand at mixing your own goose perfume. Teddy watches with growing concern as you crush marjoram and drizzle in a bit of oil. The result isn't exactly luxurious, but it's personal. You dab a little on Teddy's back. She tolerates it barely before flapping off to chase a passing beetle. And just like that, you're a perfumer now. Not a famous one, not a particularly skilled one, but one with a goose, a dream, and a house that now permanently smells like an herbalist's sandal. The days stretch gently into weeks, and your life settles into a rhythm infused with subtle scents and soft honks. You find yourself paying closer attention to the smaller moments, the way the sun catches the curve of Teddy's feathers, how the faint perfume clings to your clothes long after you leave the house, the unexpected kindness of neighbors who offer bits of lotus or bundles of rosemary for your little project. One morning you join a gathering at the Temple of Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, where the priestesses are preparing a festival that includes an unusual parade, perfumed animals of all kinds, cats with jasmine collars, sacred bulls rubbed with cedar oil, and of course geese perfumed with oils mixed by the temple's own apothecaries. You watch as the animals are gently anointed and led through the temple's colonnades, their coats shimmering faintly in the golden light. The priests chant, softly weaving prayers that mix thanks with hopes for fertility, health, and protection. This event reveals something you hadn't fully realized before: perfuming animals was not simply about status or spectacle. It was a tactile, sensory way of connecting the earthly and divine, an act of care, devotion, and perhaps even magic. There's a moment when a small goose, much like Teti but younger and unaccustomed to the attention, begins to squawk nervously. One priestess kneels whispering reassurances and lightly stroking the bird's neck with a bundle of basil. The crowd holds its breath. Slowly the goose calms, its feathers settling and its eyes closing in quiet trust. Historians still debate whether these animal rituals were deeply symbolic religious acts or simply ancient people's way of expressing affection and maintaining hygiene. Likely it was a bit of both, a reminder that in ancient Egypt, the lines between the sacred and everyday were as fluid as the Nile's waters. Later, the priestesses invite you to try your hand at mixing anointing oils. You're surprised by the delicate balance required. Too much frankincense, and the scent overwhelms. Too little myrrh, and the magic seems to fade. Tati, ever the critic, watches from the sidelines, occasionally honking her approval, or more often disagreeing with a sharp peck at your sandal. The festival concludes with a quiet procession under the stars. Lanterns cast soft glows on limestone walls, and the air is thick with incense and warm earth. As the animals are released back into the city, their faint scents linger like whispered blessings. You walk home beneath a slow drift of stars, feeling a deep calm settle over you. The world is both ancient and alive, scented with history, mystery, and the gentle companionship of a perfumed pet goose. The weeks unfold gently, and the scent of your perfumed pet goose becomes a quiet signature of your days, a soft, persistent presence, like the distant murmur of the Nile. You find comfort in the routine, the careful mixing of oils, the quiet conversations with the apothecary, and the soft shuffle of Teddy's webbed feet on the earthen floor. One afternoon, you stumble upon a curious tradition among local goosekeepers, perfuming their birds not just for ceremony, but to protect them from a peculiar nuisance, the desert flies. A blend of crushed cedar, a hint of cumin, and a dash of frankincense is said to keep those pesky insects at bay. You try the recipe, half expecting Teddy to object, but she seems to approve with a satisfied honk. Historians still argue whether these practical uses of perfume predate the religious ones or evolved alongside them. But either way, it's clear that scent in ancient Egypt was a versatile tool, at once sacred, social, and surprisingly utilitarian. As you watch Teddy preen in the warm sunlight, a faint trail of perfumed feathers drifting behind her, you realize how much this small, fragrant companion has changed your world. From a simple pet to a symbol of status, spirituality, and affection, she embodies the layered complexity of an ancient culture that found meaning in the most unexpected places. The daily life of ancient Egyptians might seem foreign and distant, but through the lens of something as gentle as a perfumed goose, it becomes intimate and strangely relatable. A reminder that across millennia, humans have always sought comfort, beauty, and connection, even in the smallest, most fragrant details. Now, as you prepare to settle in for the night, the scent of marjoram and lotus lingering softly in the air, you feel a quiet gratitude for this journey, a gentle passage through history's scented corridors, accompanied by the faithful perfumed honks of a beloved pet. Let your mind drift like the soft petals on the Nile breeze. The ancient world is breathing quietly all around you, wrapped in fragrance, mystery, and the steady heartbeat of a goose who long ago was just as much a part of life as the rising sun. Sleep well. Section 15, Wind Down. The day fades into a gentle twilight, the scents of marjoram and cedar mingling softly with the cool desert air outside your window. You feel the slow, soothing rhythm of the Nile flowing through the stories you've wandered, like a lullaby whispered across time. The familiar honk of a pet goose echoes faintly in your mind, a companion on this tranquil journey into Egypt's scented past. There's a calm here, a quiet peace in knowing that even thousands of years ago, amidst the bustling temples and sun-baked streets, people found comfort in small acts of care and fragrance. These scents are more than just smells. They are memories, prayers, and whispers of love carried gently on the wind. So as you close your eyes, imagine the soft, feathered touch of a perfumed goose beside you, its warmth and scent wrapping you in the timeless embrace of an ancient world. Let your breath slow, your thoughts soften, and your dreams blossom like the lotus in the sun. Good night, and may your sleep be as peaceful as the Nile at dusk.